The environmental crisis is accelerating by the day. Some of the brightest scientists warned us about this climate crisis driven by out of control gas emissions, and the same scientists are predicting that things are likely to go worse. I am David Daoud of the Trending Paths podcast, which covers all aspects of sustainability and technology management. I am the principal analyst at advisory firm Compliance Standards LLC, and welcome to today's episode where we are diving into a critical topic, rethinking climate action. In 2023 and 2024, the urgency for real climate solutions has hit us really harder than ever. We've seen devastating floods in places such as Florida, California, China, Libya, and even in the mighty Sahara deserts. There have been record-breaking wildfires, and clearly the situation is not improving. These environmental disasters require us to look at what we are doing as humans and perhaps agree on the need for what would be more genuine action. Among those who should make concerted efforts to help find solutions to an environment where it is progressively more challenging to live in, corporations should be active in doing so. Now, companies, in particular in the West, have been under pressure by stakeholders to reduce their impact on the environment. But while efforts are underway to reduce their environmental footprint, the boat is too large to turn around that quickly. Most infrastructures that humanity and the global economy rely on are powered by fossil fuel and hydrocarbons-based energy. Reducing hydrocarbon consumption and replacing it with another source of energy is going to take a long time to achieve, with a great deal of pressure and a lot of money. In the meantime, industry has been looking for ways to decarbonize, including creating new markets to engage in so-called carbon trading. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the environmental catastrophes of 2023 and 2024 and their implications. We're going to be looking at as well as on how carbon credits work and their limitations. We will be checking very quickly what's the financial ecosystem behind carbon credits and the risk of greenwashing. Finally, the powerful alternative to carbon insetting. So let's jump right in. Over the past years, probably all of us experienced directly or indirectly some environmental disaster one way or another. In 2023 alone, almost 100,000 people died from environmental disasters, with the most affected regions being those of Turkey and Syria, where there was a massive earthquake causing the death of nearly 60,000 people. And then you had the Libya floods, which took around 12,000 lives. Obviously, the global death toll was bigger because then you add the impact of Cyclone Freddy, affecting countries in Southeast Africa, and other significant incidents like the wildfires in Maui and Hawaii, and various extreme floods. Now, this year of 2024, we do not have a final tally yet, but preliminary data suggests that intense weather patterns and natural disasters continue to take lives worldwide. In fact, just this week, a devastating flood in Spain's Valencia region has claimed at least 95 lives, marking the deadliest flooding in Spain's modern history and Europe's worst flooding since 2021. If you're not alarmed by this, just consider that on October 30th, 2024, a year's worth of rainfall fell within 8 hours, submerging highways, devastating Valencia's crucial citrus farms, and leaving areas like Turis, Chiva, and Bunol severely affected. Torrential water currents destroyed bridges, damaged infrastructure, and clearly forced residents onto rooftops for safety. In this case, the climate crisis likely played a significant role in the severity of this flooding event in Valencia. Meteorologists actually point out that extreme events like this, which used to be rare, are now occurring more frequently and with greater destructive capacity, largely due to climate-related factors. The Mediterranean's rising temperatures are linked to the broader trend of global warming, exacerbating conditions for flash floods and impacting regional weather patterns. Now, beside deaths, there is also the financial cost of environmental disasters. In 2023 alone, climate-related disasters caused financial losses amounting to almost $380 billion globally. But here's the sad part. Only less than one-third, exactly 31% of those losses, were insured. This means that entire communities were essentially left financially vulnerable and in ruin. Well, for those of us who live in the US, the focus has been on Florida and California, for example. We should emphasize still that environmental disasters have no boundaries. Think again of the devastating Turkey-Syria earthquake, the widespread floods in China, and record-breaking wildfires in Canada. There was virtually an entire region in northern Libya that was wiped out by an unusually strong storm called Storm Daniel. The fires that have ravaged regions in the Mediterranean, in Canada, in the United States West Coast, for example, added to global emissions, further fueling climate change. Scientists have been warning us for years and even decades of the pending crisis. Temperatures were expected to rise, and they have been climbing. We already experienced the hottest year on record, with surface and sea temperatures breaking new monthly highs. This was largely driven by the return of El Niño, which made droughts and fires even more intense, affecting regions like the Amazon, like Canada, Southern Europe. What scientists are reminding us, though, is that the situation is set to worsen because climate warming is reducing the natural ability of the forests to act as carbon sinks. Listen to this for a moment. Researchers now have scientific evidence that parts of critical areas, think of the Amazon, for example, are now emitting carbon rather than absorbing it, as it's always been the case. So as we look into the future, it would be irresponsible to assume that the climate would eventually normalize and come back to acceptable temperatures by miracle. We should prepare for difficult years or decades to come and look for ways to make real adjustments in the way we consume energy and we release carbon. Companies in the Western world have been under immense pressure to play a positive role. They have created a market where companies that are making progress in improving their environmental position can actually sell carbon credits to companies that are not doing the right things yet. However, this traditional carbon offsetting strategy is just not enough to address the scale of climate change that we're experiencing. Real direct actions are necessary if we want to see a substantial impact. So now let's talk about carbon credit. Think of them as a kind of a permission slip, if you will, that lets a company emit a certain amount of CO2. For every ton of CO2 a company emits, it can either reduce its emissions directly, or it can buy a carbon credit from someone else removed or avoided that same amount of carbon. Typically, these credits are sold by projects like reforestations, renewable energy farms, or even methane capture initiatives. The idea here is that by buying these credits, companies can offset their own emissions. But here's the thing, though. Carbon credits, while very helpful, have their limitations. First, they can be a bit of a crutch, allowing companies to claim that they're offsetting emissions without actually really reducing their own impact. This means emissions remain high, and in some cases, companies may continue unsustainable practices, knowing that they can just buy credit to offset them. Think of it as a religious cleric selling you a ticket to heaven, or forgives you your past sins in exchange for money and favors, while still allowing you to commit sins. Of course, it's not as extreme as this, but it is a metaphor meant to explain where carbon offsetting stands these days. Secondly, the carbon credit market is at risk of becoming a tool for so-called greenwashing. In some cases, companies may buy credits to look eco-friendly without making changes in their own operations. And so that's a problem. And thirdly, not all carbon offset projects are actually effective or permanent. Take a reforestation project, which may sell credits based on new trees planted, but if those trees are cut down or destroyed, the carbon reduction is undone. Now, some offset projects like tree planting also take years to absorb CO2, which doesn't align with the urgency needed to address climate change. So while I recognize that carbon credits play a critical role by channeling resources and money into the right projects, they're not enough. So let me dig deeper into the carbon credit market. Carbon credits have created an entire industry of organizations that include certification bodies, auditing companies and organizations, brokers, and then exchanges, obviously. Certification bodies are responsible for verifying that a project truly offsets the emissions it claims to, while brokers and exchanges facilitate transactions between companies and projects. But here's a reality check for sure. This market structure introduces a layer of cost and complexity. While these market participants profit, they don't always guarantee a meaningful climate action. There's been a lot of critics who often argue that financial incentives sometimes drive the market more than the genuine need to reduce emissions. And in most cases, a lot of cases, I agree with them. In fact, with so many layers involved, some offset projects are clearly criticized for having inflated claims. This means that environmental benefits can be not clear and very much uncertain, or in some cases, very minimal. Now, the focus on profit can sometimes overshadow the true purpose of carbon credits, which is to drive real reductions in greenhouse gases. So the question is, can a market-based solution truly align with environmental priorities? This is where the carbon insetting stands out as a more promising addition. So what is exactly a carbon insetting, and how does it differ from offsetting? Well, in simple terms, insetting means companies effectively reduce emissions within their own supply chain and within their own organization, instead of buying credits from outside to offset emissions. They make real impactful changes in their own operations, hence the use of the prepositions in and off. For example, a chocolate company might invest in sustainable cocoa farming practices that help sequester carbon while also supporting local farmers and local communities. Or a tech company that might transition to renewable energy across all its data centers, directly lowering its carbon footprint. Why is insetting a strong solution? Well, first, it offers direct, measurable reductions within a company's own operations. Second, it strengthens the ecosystem and communities within a company's supply chain, essentially building resilience against climate impact. So as an industry analyst, my job is to track the performance of the IT recycling sector and the impact of technology in all of this. And so the question is, as I discuss ESG and environmental issues with clients and business leaders, what does this mean for them and for businesses and for the future of climate action within the tech sector? I am seeing a shift where more companies are recognizing the limitations of offsets and are clearly moving towards insetting. This shift is also driven clearly by investors and consumers who demand genuine climate responsibility. For companies, the practical takeaway here is to start looking at their own operations and supply chains. And setting might mean an initial investment. It could even be a substantial one, but it builds resilience. It sustains your operations. It enhances sustainability and trust. In the technology recycling sector, such investment could span from reassessing your energy sourcing to choosing a logistics partner that can optimize their transportation routes to minimize energy consumption, for example. The fact that a laptop can have a second life, that in itself is a big Insetting move that should be quantified and reported. And for listeners, consider supporting companies that prioritize direct climate actions within their operations. Now, as I wrap up this episode, let's take a step back for a moment and remember why this conversation matters. The traditional carbon credits and offsets have been an important part of the climate solution, and they still are, but they are simply not enough to address the scale and the urgency and the speed in which climate is changing. Shift to Insetting could bring more effective solutions into climate action with quantifiable benefits in terms of decarbonization. If you'd like to learn more about the topic and sustainability and sustainable business practices in general, be sure to check out our blog at trendingpaths.com, where we dive into topics just like this. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, the region where you are, where you live, and the planet as a whole depend on more than just good intentions. It depends on meaningful action, and see you next time.